I will not give a classical academic approach, but more or less something like a briefing. So I have some notes here that I'm going to go through in a sort of story about how the context has changed and what this means for the main topic of the conference. So the ancient Romans, they called the mediators internicus, medium, conciliator, interlocutor, interpolator. In the end, they came to mediator. So media and mediator is probably, the roots are the same, not probably, but they are. And they date back to the ancient times. This point here is the game and the players is, in essence, since the ancient times, pretty much the same. But what is the game? The game is man is in the business of killing other men for ages. And that has not changed. And that's going to last. And someone was always there to mediate, to stop the killing, at least for a while. And that's where I connect to Mr. Dacic this morning, who said this profession might have a bright future, but by these few introductory sentences, you can see that it's one of the oldest professions on earth. So in that sense, what has changed in the rules? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and how the tools have changed in this permanent, ongoing struggle of the humanity to survive and, of course, to prosper. So the players now must take into account the changed context and apply that knowledge to a winning strategy. They just must do that. The new rules are actually, to a great degree, determined and set by the new technologies. And it's a historic divide, this change from analog to digital worlds. And it's something that's not going to change in the sense go back. It's a completely new world. So we are full force as we speak in the digital age of networking. All of us here are networked 24 hours a day, and most of us, if we lost our mobile device, would have serious mental problems. So you can imagine this room being bombarded by streams of invisible electromagnetic signals and waves, all the time, 24 hours a day. So that's one of the new facts of new reality. Interactivity. Humanity has been striving for interactive media for thousands of years. This is the time, and these are the generations that are now enjoying that strive. Because these interactive media probably make the most of that difference, meaning you can interact with one person on a global scale and with a million people at the same time. That was never possible before. So that's another reality of this new situation. Immediacy. And the great Marshall McLuhan, you might know his great slogan. One slogan was the global village, and the other slogan was medium is the message. Those two slogans hold today, and they're stronger than ever. In the sense of a global village, that's been used a lot, but McLuhan said the function or the creation of the global village is a function of immediacy. Now we are immediately in the midst of events that we want to be in. And that's something completely new also. So you can imagine that as somebody is in an ongoing process of any kind, he can immediately be in another process of a different kind and interact with a third or fourth or nth process. So another thing is real time. As opposed to Mr. Einstein, who said time is relative, in media, time is an absolute category. Because media actually, they exist by selling time. And what was the new step in this technological revolution? Everything can happen in real time. And we are getting very close to the Orwellian Big Brother situation in which everybody is being watched in real time 24 hours a day, or at least being somehow tracked. The City of London has more than 70,000 security cameras. So each citizen of town of London is recorded at least 5 times a day by one of those cameras, not even knowing. So that's one of the new realities also, in real time, which you can record and then play back and then maybe interlock with new real time and so on and so forth. And the last but not least of these majors is speed. Speed of development in media, and especially digital technology, is exponential, meaning that we are not adding 2 and 2, we are just zooming through time in ever introducing new tools, new media, new aspects, new features, new qualities. And again, to quote Marshall McLuhan, media, when he said medium is the message, media are extension of man and extension of his senses. Therefore, in that he said, our brain is extended by electronic and digital media, by external memory, which you can see how that is become important in cloud technology, in storages of mega proportions and so on and so forth, where we can reach in and get information and data that we need at, I say immediate timing. So that's the context, and that's the tools that have changed. Now, new media or digital technologies, they facilitate and they increase, and this is going to be probably interesting for some of you who are in the profession of mediation. They increase or they facilitate, if they don't increase, dialogue. As I mentioned, multilateralism. Because you can multi-communicate with X factors, whichever point on the planet they are. Neutrality, which is also extremely important in mediation. As in net neutrality, which my colleague will probably mention a lot, and there's a book, there's an excellent book out there which you could take on your way out and see all about net neutrality. But neutrality is one of the very problematic points in development of new technology. I don't know how much you have noticed that the FCC, the American Regulatory Agency, has, under the administration of President Trump, actually gone back on net neutrality. So as of April 1st, we'll have a completely new situation. We'll have a class society in internet. So far, internet was a classless society, a classless medium. It wasn't recognized by classes. So if there was any communist system in the original sense of classlessness, that was internet up to April 1st of this year. Now, who is introducing classes? Of course, the originators of the system, which has gone its early childhood stages and now in its sort of serious stage, it, as you see, is being attempted to be regulated from all sorts of sides. So the European Union has been regulating the internet very seriously and very strongly for a couple of years back. And since starting January 1st, the German government has introduced draconian measures as to hate speech, all of the fake news and data that you can see on the internet in the wake of everything that has happened 2016 in the American elections. Then understanding, they facilitate understanding, because it's really very powerful if you can go on Google Earth and understand how your neighbor lives and where he lives. And you do that by sitting in your own home, in your own chair. Not to speak a new word, Google it. So understanding is exponentially increased in the digital age. We can now attempt to understand what we never understood. How many thousands and millions of sites you have at your disposal if you need to understand something, including your opponent. And that has never been in the history. That has never been in the history. So the authority of knowledge has been completely changed in this new era. It's not the points of authority of the last 7 centuries that resided in the church, in the state, in the military, in the educational system. That's the ultimate authority anymore. It's gone massive. So it's hard to pinpoint authorities in this new age. And that also is very, very important for mediation. Who is the authority and who has the trust of everybody involved? Disappearance of boundaries. How do you get into a land that's called Facebook land? Where does it start? Where does it end? Where are the boundaries? It's extraterritorial. So that's a new situation. Of course, when you approach it from the mediation point of view, then it's a resource. It's easy to go into a new territory, as opposed to 19th century when you had to really skillful to go into Afghanistan. Nowadays, it's a completely different story. Popular or global culture, I'm not going to talk about that much, you know. And this is where the United States still leads by, shall we say, imposing, or at least disseminating its cultural standards across the world through media, and especially amplifying that through new digital media. Because in the 20th century, it was all major communication technologies that have been born on the territory of the United States and developed into commercial and profitable entities. So it's still that asymmetrical relation between power of media, which has been changing lately. You have all noticed by media like Al Jazeera, like Russia Today, and new media spring all over the planet. Citizen journalism, that's a completely new phenomenon, which of course goes together with citizen activism. And now you have the authority of journalists being also taken away in its full capacity. Now everybody, not even identifying himself, can be a journalist and is a journalist and contributing to this massive global community of what? Of reports, of information, of data exchange. So you have that authority also being challenged, not completely overturned. You have a popular or public diplomacy that's also shaping as a new form, a new situation. I'm not going to talk about that. There are diplomats in this hall much more expert than I am. So you have the digital divide. And that's something which is really sort of marking the areas of the world. You previously had the underdeveloped South and the overdeveloped North. You had the very super-armed East and super-armed West. But now you have this special divide, which those who are not digitized lives in some sort of a semi-dark age. So this divide is very, very powerful. Hopefully it's not going to last that much longer, because as we speak, Mr. The owner of SpaceX, Mr. Elon Musk, is planning to launch 4,000 microsatellites into the orbit in order to cover the whole Earth with broadband. So there goes your digital divide. But still, we are talking about divide. And then we have a generational divide, which is extremely important to understand. And that goes by this. It's not a phenomenon that's strictly a phenomenon of the digital age, but it has become a phenomenon in the electronic age after World War II. That goes like this. A young person in Japan, in China, in West Berlin, or Berlin, in Belgrade, in Rome, in Los Angeles, a young 18-year-old person has more in common with each other than with his grandparents, in a cultural and in a media sense. They're media savvy, they know how to use media, and they use them. And they communicate completely freely and openly, and they understand that communication. And they understand the values that are placed in that communication. And that generational divide is something that's actually dramatically impacting the previous world order. And that has to be taken into account, of course, in these processes of reaching towards peaceful solutions and so on and so on. So, of course, somebody in Northern Ireland who is Catholic and somebody who's Protestant listens to you too. Both sides listen to you too. Both sides, or three sides, listen to, say, Shakira. So that's the pop world culture that's been actually involving new generations full-time into a new cultural order, so to speak. So in that, we have to count in multiple identities. That's something that the new technology is really abundantly supplying us with as an option. We can have multiple identities as private people, as institutions, as organizations, and you see the effect of that in the huge uproar following the United States elections 2006, and the huge stigma on the Russian hackers and the Russian state for attempting to change that by using false identities. The whole thing is based on false identities, and the biggest problem the United States institutions have is to identify those identities and to deal with them on their level. And it's a confusing world. Not that institutions are not doing their work to decipher that, but that's a whole new situation that's been created. Limitless communication channels, and these multiple channels form massive virtual communities. Massive virtual community. Different communities obtain a certain cohesion which puts them on the international map. If Facebook was a country, it would be the most populous country on earth. Up to 3 billion people. And that's the huge scramble in the United States, in Germany, Britain, and so on. How to handle Facebook now, what to do with them. Of course, people are already talking about Zuckerberg being the president of the United States in 2050 or something like that, and so on and so forth. So it's a big run to what? To regulate these new nations, virtual nations, which include all of this previously said. generations, interactivity, immediacy, new languages, multiple communication channels. It's all in there. And it's not fiction, it's not science fiction, it's reality. So the main brokers in all of this are, or mediators, if you want to call them that, of information are, of course, the media. So states and governments have to, they cannot really ignore, have to be aware of the international impact they project through their media or to global media. That's now a new standard. They have to. Media can lower tensions, and they usually do, but not often enough. Most often they do exactly the opposite. They can lower conflicts by giving what? New perspectives to new mass audiences. And that's as political as you can get. If a million of new people get a new perspective. So media evolution is strongly influencing both local, domestic, and international systems and institutions, and therefore it's influencing foreign policies worldwide. Media control what people think about, not how people think. But the topics, the choice of topics defines the politics. And I'm now going to quote Mr. James Baker, United States Secretary of State, year is 1997. And I'm quoting him exactly. He says to the media, public statement, very often, television determines what is crisis. Television has concluded that the breakup of Yugoslavia and the war in the Balkans is a crisis. They started to cover, to report and report. The Clinton administration was thus made to undertake something. Something. And we know what they had to undertake in order to satisfy this media hunger, how that unfolded. And he ends like this. Mr. Baker says this: this wasn't the case in Rwanda, where excesses were the same or even greater. And we heard today, this morning, why isn't Yemen the topic? And why Ukraine is, or Ukraine? That's, well, largely up to the media, of course. The politicians do their job, but it's very important to understand that Western media are really profit-driven and time share rating-driven and so forth and so on, and that's where this generator of crisis, since Hearst, the huge newspaper magnate, proclaimed, "You just go report, I'll make you a war," and that's how Mexican-American War started. Because Hearst needed what? Reports, needed readership, needed circulation, and so on and so forth. So this is a few things I wanted to say in the beginning, not to overburden you with all of these things that we could talk for a long time about, but it's to just end with, it's the great media events that can be great mediators. Or, to say more specifically, events that are covered by media. We have the most recent example of North Korea Olympic Games. So you can see how the North Korean regime has used that event to publicly expose a sort of a new face of North Korea to the world, and lower tensions by that. And we, for the first time in a long time, saw a joint sports team with a special flag. So that was exclusively a media move in mediation. And it was perfectly done. Then we have World Championships, and all of you know European Song Contest. Only on the face of it, it's only an entertainment show. But I, for fact, know from my colleagues in European Broadcasting Union that they cherish this one yearly event as nothing else. It's pan-European unity shown to the world. In what? Real time, up to 700 million viewers. You cannot achieve that, and plus streaming, plus replaying, but in real time. So they would for nothing sacrifice the whatever happens. But also it's a politicized stage, if any of you know how that goes from year to year. But it's also a platform for mediating, opposing, even aesthetic views, which actually, when shown together, show that they are not in the sense other than human. So that's the basic premise from which all mediation needs to start. It's humans involved. And that's the last chance we have before the artificial intelligence is involved. And that's the new big stage. So opening media space and time to different opposing views and to different standpoints is crucial. It may be hard, but it's crucial. The lucky news is that the digital technology by itself, by its neutrality, does precisely that. So we have an extremely powerful tool to use in order to achieve harmony, to achieve those human traits that have been with us for millennia, like the Chinese civilization. 5,000 years in continuity. That's something that you can approach through new media, comfortably. So the new technology is the great equalizer. On one side, we have 5,000 years of accumulated technology, history, culture, politics, war, and on the other side, we have 300 years. And the technology equalizes. You can enter both worlds and harmonize. Only if you have intention, potential, and strategy. I was impressed by today's morning session by the statement by Mr. Kruk, who said certainty is something that is very, very important in mediation. And to me, I recall a meeting with the Chinese delegation of 16+1 formula in Belgrade here, and I was really impressed how certain the Chinese were what they were going to do in 2050, 2080, and 3000. How certain. And that certainty is what? It's sort of, you can see in real time how it's evaporating in the West. West is losing its certainty. And that is the main disbalance today. They're not certain anymore that that model is going to last or that civilization is going to last, as Manifest Destiny has proclaimed, the doctrine of the beginning of the 20th century. They're not certain. But I'm sure that the Chinese are certain that their civilization will last another 5,000 years. So are the Russians. They're certain that they're unbeatable. Maybe they're wrong, but they're certain. Same as the British were wrong in their certainty that when they came to Iran and they took all the oil fields, and when Mr. Mossadegh, first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, nationalized them, the British were certain that it's their property. They were certain there is God. But that's changed. So certainty is that global, shall we say, even philosophical, tectonic change as I see it. Loss of certainty on one side and rise of certainty on the other side. Whatever elements help stabilize or grow those certainties, you will know better than I do. Thank you very much.